The way it works in court, a little bit of a legal breakout session, is if you have a temporary restraining order, which is only in place for a short amount of time, in this case, it's only in place for about 5 days, you wait until there's a preliminary injunction of one Hampton Dellinger, who ran in on an emergency injunction and obtained a temporary restraining order from a federal court judge in the District of Columbia, at which time then the courts of appeal have jurisdiction. They generally don't have jurisdiction over temporary restraining orders.
In a shocking 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court just rejected Donald Trump's claim of absolute immunity, which means he could face trial for his actions related to January 6th before the election.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible. My people are so smart. And you know what else they say about my people? The polls. They say, I have the most loyal people. Did you ever see that? No, they say, Trump, we love you too, man. Trump's voters are by far, you know, I'm at 68, 69%. I'm at 90% total.
3 of his own appointees ruled against him, putting a major dent in his delay strategy. During the hearing, Trump's lawyer was forced to admit that some presidential actions aren't protected by immunity, a statement that legal experts say was equivalent to scoring a touchdown for the opposing team. This admission opens the door for prosecutors to pursue criminal charges against Trump for actions that weren't part of his official presidential duties.
First stop on the train is Chief Justice Roberts. Why? But not just because he's the chief of the Supreme Court, but because any appeal that comes out of the DC, the Trump administration, by claiming that the Supreme Court has power under what is referred to as the All Writs Act, but that's very narrow in application. It doesn't apply to the facts of this case. Appellate courts goes firstly to Chief Justice Roberts on an emergency application. He could have denied this on his own, but he decided, I guess, anything related to Trump, he's going to throw it back to the entirety of the 9 justices of the panel.
Like allegedly trying to overturn election results. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Picture this. Trump's lawyer John Sauer strutting into the Supreme Court like he's got an ace up his sleeve, only to commit what might be the legal equivalent of stepping on a rake and smacking himself in the face. Talk about a spectacular self-own. For years, our favorite orange former president has been ranting about having absolute immunity. You know, that magical shield that supposedly lets him do whatever he wants without consequences. Remember when he bragged he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose voters? Well, he apparently thought that applied to legal consequences too. But then came the mother of all plot twists. Sauer, the very guy who was supposed to defend Trump's absurd immunity claims, completely dropped the ball in front of the highest court in the land.
Feel that as a president, you have to have immunity. Very simple.
The court's very explicit about this. It lays out its framework by saying, quote, "The nature of presidential power entitles a former president to absolute immunity from criminal prosecution for actions within his conclusive and preclusive constitutional authority."
Instead of sticking to the script, he actually admitted that some of Trump's actions as president were actually private and not covered by immunity. I mean, you had one job, buddy. Legal experts watched this train wreck unfold with their jaws on the floor. They literally called it the equivalent of scoring a touchdown for the opposing team. Can you imagine Trump watching this debacle on TV? His face probably turned a shade of red we don't even have a name for yet. The Supreme Court justices, sensing blood in the water, pounced on this admission faster than Trump on a bucket of KFC. They immediately started firing questions about which actions would count as official presidential duties, and which were just Trump being Trump.
Donald Trump's defense team puts forward this argument that a former president should be held completely immune from prosecution for any of the acts that they performed while in office. They're pressuring the Justice Department to investigate whoever he wants to investigate as president can ever be subject to criminal liability.
This distinction was exactly what Donnie had been hoping to avoid, because once you admit some actions aren't covered by immunity, you open the door to actual accountability. The whole plan was so transparent: delay the trials until after the election, win in November, pardon himself, and voila, freedom. But Sauer basically threw a wrench in the entire scheme when he stood there and told the justices, yeah, some of that stuff wasn't presidential business at all. Way to throw your client under the bus, counselor. This wasn't just a minor slip-up. It was a catastrophic implosion of Trump's entire legal strategy. The admission created a massive crack in the immunity armor that Trump had been hiding behind. It's like Sauer handed the prosecution a roadmap and said, "Here's how you can get him." That crack in Trump's immunity armor was about to become a gaping hole, thanks to the most delicious irony of all, betrayal from his own Supreme Court appointees. The three justices Trump had personally selected, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, weren't exactly rushing to save their benefactor. Turns out that lifetime appointment means they don't need to send thank you cards anymore. Remember how Trump used to strut around calling them "my judges," like they were contestants on some weird judicial version of The Apprentice? Well, surprise, those fancy robes don't come with loyalty oaths attached. In a plot twist that would make Shakespeare proud, all three Trump appointees joined the 6-3 ruling against him. Et tu, Brett? The Supreme Court hearing quickly turned into a legal horror show for Trump's team. Justice Sotomayor delivered what might be the most devastating hypothetical ever posed in the highest court. Could a president order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival and then claim immunity? Trump's lawyer might as well have been trying to solve advanced calculus while being chased by bears. He simply couldn't give a coherent answer. The justices were practically rolling their eyes so hard they risked getting a collective migraine. They piled on with increasingly absurd scenarios that exposed the dangerous implications of Trump's immunity claims. Could a president rob a bank? Order the military to stage a coup? All while shouting presidential immunity like it's some magical spell that makes consequences disappear? Brett Kavanaugh, the man whose Senate confirmation Trump personally championed, looked especially uncomfortable as these arguments unfolded. Imagine being forced to listen to legal reasoning so flimsy it would embarrass a first-year law student. Now imagine that student was the guy who gave you your job. Awkward. Trump's legal team turned their immunity argument into a sandcastle at high tide, watching it dissolve with each judicial question. The justices weren't buying what Trump was selling, and his own nominees seemed particularly determined to prove they weren't in anyone's pocket, especially not the pocket of a guy with such tiny hands. The Supreme Court's message was crystal clear. Presidents aren't kings, and they definitely can't order hits on political rivals before heading to McDonald's for a celebratory Big Mac. The ruling means that Trump, a man who has spent his entire life dodging consequences like they're vegetables on his dinner plate, might actually have to face justice like a regular citizen. Well, folks, here we are at the end of another episode of the Donald's legal disasters. The Supreme Court basically took Trump's fantasy world, where he's above the law, and flushed it down his gold-plated toilet. And isn't it just delicious that the very people he thought would save him, his own lawyer and his hand-picked justices, are the ones who pulled the rug out from under his tiny feet? This is what happens when you think you're a king in a democracy. Our founding fathers are probably high-fiving in their graves right now. Old grumpy Trumpy might finally learn that even when you stack the deck, sometimes the house still wins.